Hey, listeners, in this episode of the Fast 15, we get a chance to discover more about Dr. DeShanna Reed, who is a two-time TEDx speaker, an author of multiple books and publications, and an experienced researcher. She's an educator and a former school administrator with 2 decades of expertise in both elementary and secondary levels in special education, and specifically in student behavior management. Dr. Reed's expertise in educational and behavioral health research focuses on social emotional learning, accessibility, equity, and inclusion. Join us in welcoming her to the Fast 15. Dr. DeShanna Reed, it's such a privilege to have you here on the Fast 15 today and listen just about your story and where you have come from in your career. And we just really want to find out a little bit more about you personally, just what story has brought you to where you're at. And then also just professionally, what are you doing in your corner of the world? You're out in Texas.
I'm in
Houston, Texas. And so would you do that for us? Would you just start out and share a little bit about your story and so our listeners can learn about you?
Oh my goodness, without overwhelming with our time, as my story on the professional side, I actually entered education almost by accident. What I mean by that is at the time I entered education, I was actually serving as a behavioral health research assistant at MD Anderson Cancer Center. My background is in psychology with focus on neuroendocrinology. It's a really long one. It has a lot to do with the brain, its function, and how certain elements of that impacted the endocrine system. I was doing some really great community-based research, which was fabulous, actually. But the challenge is doing that when you have one in pre-K and one in 5th grade was not to continuing. And so I knew that I was going to have to walk away from that job, even though it was very much on the trajectory of what I believed my dream job was at the time. But it's more important for me to be able to be a mom and be present for them. And so 3rd or 4th time that I was late picking up my daughter from pre-K, the principal met me at the door and asked me if there was anything that she could do to help. And then also asked me if I had ever considered entering education. And at first I was like, okay, wait, look, I was just late. All right. Like that's a career change. Can we just pump?
Right.
But
hold up.
Right. Just all right. I was a little late. That mean I need a complete career change. But
right.
No, I can't explain to you why I'm asking you this. I just feel led to ask you.
Okay.
Well, like a coincidence kind of person. So there's a reason why. And I said, well, said if I be a teacher and I got a student like me, I would probably quit. So I don't know if I would.
Oh, wow.
Son, you might surprise yourself. Maybe that's something you should consider. I mean, if nothing else, if I'm wrong, you do it for a little while, and maybe you decide you want to move on to something else. But it will give you the opportunity to still make an impact. And it'll also give you the opportunity to not be late. I'm really picking your challenge. Great, so much. I read it all the way back to that.
What a strategy. That's a strategy.
Get it back. And so I took her up on it, and surprised to know that you needed more than just a degree to be a teacher. I didn't go to school for education, so I didn't realize what it was you had to do. It was a para.
Okay, awesome.
A huge pay cut, but I learned a lot, and ultimately it really wasn't all that different than what my regular life was. I elected to start with resource students and then requested to work with life skills because I knew how need was. And also that really mirrored what my personal life was. I'm the youngest of 4. I have a differently abled sibling. And so while I was young and I was at home, I had the opportunity to be part of her everyday life. She has level 3 autism. So there are certain elements that she requires assistance with and guidance and somewhat oversight. She can do a lot of things. Sometimes it's funny. She just likes us to do things for her. But she knows how to do things, not only verbal. So I understood. And so for me, when I entered the classroom in that way, I really was just considering the type of teacher my sister needed when she was your age.
Powerful.
I mean, she's 17 years older than I am. And so she got her diagnosis in the late 1960s. And back then, it was virtually unheard of to have differently abled students at school with their same age peers that weren't differently abled. It was generally frowned upon. And so my mom had to do a great deal of teaching her at home and managing that with, other children that were not differently abled. And so I remembered the stories of the early days with them and what it was like and how they wished that they had had teachers that cared, that really wanted to nurture and develop her and just saw her, not just what were her perceived limitations, and really genuinely tried to form community with them and help them to understand some of the things that were going on educationally or otherwise, just really trying to navigate those paths. And so I wanted to be the kind of teacher that she needed.
Yes, yes. We're going to take just a quick bit of a pause to give a shout out to our sponsors, SDES, and then we'll get right back to our conversation.
Functional Academics by SDES's collaborative work with educators and families just like you provides an in-depth understanding of your needs in the community we serve. You've asked, we listen. It's coming. Stay tuned with more to come at sdesworks.com.
And one of the things that I'm picking up from you just in our short conversations at this point is that seeing the strengths in somebody, right? Not seeing their limitations. I'm making this comparison between you and the principal, seeing your lateness and being mad at you. But no, the principal sees some strength in you as a potential educator. And
so maybe.
Right. But I just see that as so powerful. It doesn't matter who we're approaching, whether they're differently abled or typically developing, seeing strengths in people and pulling that out. Right, is so powerful. And that's where we need to be. That's the type of educator I want to be as well. So tell me a little bit more about that, how from your time in the classroom, now you're talking about that. How did your personal experiences and then now your professional, where was the crossover for that in what you're doing now with advocacy, just coaching people up in all of the advocacy and the sibling component as well?
Well, for me, it was kind of a natural progression to get to where I am now. And to be honest, I feel like I probably was always doing it.
Okay.
Just the structure of it was different. And so, moving on past those early years, I ended up spending, I would say, 12-ish years in and out of the classroom at varying grade levels. And ultimately for me, at every stage and every position I was in, whether I was a special education teacher, a resource life skills, the preschool program for children with disabilities, if I was in a general education classroom, whether it was elementary or secondary, and then I eventually became a campus administrator, it didn't matter. Every place that I was, I kept the mindset of what would my sister need at this time in her life? What would have been beneficial for her? What do these other people around need to know in order to make a meaningful impact in a way that is accessible, equitable, and inclusive for this particular student? I kept that in the forefront of my mind. And I kept thinking about what my parents told me about how important it was and how the times had changed, but so many mentalities hadn't. And so my role in that I kept with me was, I understand that there's been some movement, but it seems to be a very, very small movement of this needle. So what can I do to make this move faster? Who can I help educate about the importance of seeing students as they are and considering the fact that this could very well be your child or your sibling? Yeah. And what would you want done for them? And if whatever you're doing isn't moving and operating authentically in a way that you would see acceptable for someone in your family, don't do it to these children either. If you be left in the dark, don't leave parents in the dark either.
Absolutely. Yes.
Just keeping that mentality. And point for me where I decided to finally step out of this room I'm a high school transitions teacher. I was in my doctoral studies. I decided to go back into the classroom. I left my campus administration job because actually being a campus administrator during COVID was a nightmare. I love
Okay.
kids. I love
Yes.
kids, but I didn't love what it was doing to others on my campus. And I can tell you this, when you have an ineffective leader at the helm of a campus, and there's only
Yes.
one person that is actually pushing forward to make meaningful change, it becomes overwhelming for that person.
Right.
I'm willing to leave, and I was that person. It took me
Okay.
years to be willing to, but
Right.
there was that experience. And then when I was the high school transitions teacher, I was sitting in a meeting with other transitions teachers for a larger school district in the greater Houston area. And one of the central office administrators overseeing special education said, direct quote, in a room full of transition teachers, mind you, it doesn't really matter what the families want anyway. We have more seats at the table, and it's not like they understand. So we're always
Oh,
going to
no.
it is that we want. So they can disagree if they choose, but we're always going to get what we want. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized that if she felt so emboldened to say that out loud in a room full of teachers who are serving differently abled adults, helping to transition them into adulthood,
Yes.
how many more people think that?
Right.
That just wasn't acceptable for me.
Nope.
And so I decided then, okay, now's the time. All of those previous times that I had heard, you should do this, you should do all of this,
It's time.
it was time in that moment. And
Right.
I started with the mentality of leveling the playing field because I felt that families deserved to know and that we couldn't, as educators or school leaders, complain about the divide between families and schools if we're the ones perpetuating it.
Right. And we can't move forward, like you're saying, that small change, the change that has to be made has to be done from my perspective in relationships and from partnering together, from, collaborative efforts and for valuing voices.
Right.
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 And so now that you've come out of the classroom or out of the school setting, and I want to know more about your consulting, your TED Talks, and your experiences. And I know there's a lot there, but just your approaches currently. How did you do that? How did you maximize your impact for families when you stepped out of that kind of area in the school? I think we can be protected in that and really getting your voice out for positive change.
I started very small, just having meaningful conversations like this.
Okay.
Directly connecting with people in my community and being super open and honest about what my experiences were. And some of my experiences in the classroom were great.
Yep.
And I am immensely grateful for everything that I experienced, whether very, very positive or not quite so. I'm really grateful for that because that gave me additional pieces that I could add to my toolbox. Like, okay, so to make this not happen, this is what should be done. And so when I coach and I talk with instructional leaders about actually leading meaningful change in their campuses, I focus on those elements that I needed as a teacher. And the biggest thing for me, even when I was a campus administrator, I always said, even out loud to teachers that I coached directly, I am never going to forget what it was like to be in the classroom. Because the second I forget what it's like to be in the classroom, I need to hang it up.
Yes.
Because I can't lead without knowing and remembering constantly what the demands were in the classroom, what it was that I needed when I was in the classroom, and who I needed my administrators to be. And I wanted to be the kind of administrator that I always needed and didn't always have. And so for me, that was important. And when I do coach, I remind them of that. And I have them really consider, what did you need when you were boots on the ground in the classroom?
Right.
What makes you think that your teachers don't need that same thing? And how are you going to give it to them?
Right.
Because it's really cool to give them a tote bag and a coffee mug. But them in their room for 5 minutes while they go and they have their minor breakdown. and then they come back and we get back in it.
Right. Well, friends, we are too quickly at the end of this Fast 15 together, and I'm really loving this conversation with Dr. DeShanna Reed. We will pick up the conversation where we just left off in our next episode, but real quick, let's remember some key points together from what DeShanna shared with us. Number 1, differently abled siblings can have such a positive impact on how we experience and view the world. Number 2, keep a mindset for what your loved one could need and want in an equitable and inclusive school environment. Start with a mentality of leveling the playing field because families deserve to know and to not be kept in the dark. Number 3, don't ever forget what it's like to be in the trenches in the classroom, because the second you forget what it's like to be in the classroom, you need to hang it up. If you're like me, you are touched and inspired by DeShanna's story and her perspective. For the rest of the conversation, be sure to subscribe to the Fast 15 so that you don't miss the rest of her inspiring story. It'll come out next week. For now, champions, keep listening, stay encouraged, and don't forget to give a high five to other inspiring special educators and keep up the great work for your students. We'll talk to you soon. A heartfelt thank you to our generous sponsors, Specially Designed Education Services, publishers of the Functional Academics program. Please take a moment to learn more about the only true comprehensive functional academics program that enables students with moderate to severe disabilities to improve their ability to live independently and show meaningful growth both academically and personally, while creating accountability with data-driven, evidence-based results. Visit sdesworks.com to learn more.